morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. As you know, unfortunately, we've had a particularly violent start to 2020. And of course, it's very troubling and it's discouraging. And I send my condolences to all the family members and friends. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later, but I wanted to begin this morning. Most of the 2019 recaps that I see are quite focused on some of the negative stories from this past year. I think that's natural. But I do want to point out this morning some of the things that have been happening in the city that I think you and your viewers and your readers and your listeners will want to be reminded of or know about in terms of what's going on in the city. So let me highlight just a few of those things and discuss a little bit about what's on the horizon for 2020. As I travel across the city, usually daily, and spend time in our wonderful neighborhoods, I see the tremendous amount of progress that is going on in our neighborhoods. You can see cranes in the sky here, particularly downtown, but in every neighborhood, you see construction dumpsters on the curbs. And to me, that means that those folks who are perhaps getting a new roof or putting in a new kitchen or just doing a remodel have confidence in our city and confidence in their neighborhoods, and they're making those investments. So that is happening literally in every single ward across our city. And we know that because we look at the building permits, and we know that this year we had more than $1.2 billion in building permits, billion with a B, I should say. St. Louis Development Corporation also notes that women and minority businesses surpassed $800 million in estimated construction value this year over nearly 90 projects. And I'm proud of these numbers. I think that diversity in our people and diversity in our workforce is a strength for us here in the city, and we ought to all be celebrating that. And what it also tells me is that in a city like our city, in the middle of a historic renaissance, that everyone in every neighborhood is benefiting from that. We have welcomed over this past year and in recent years new and younger residents who are as diverse as their talents and who share the belief that our city of St. Louis is alive and thriving. And we're attracting new companies to relocate here and to hire these new residents, and some of us who have lived here for a long time. So when you think about companies like Square, who are renovating 900 North Tucker and will bring many additional jobs to our area, but also companies in T-Rex, in Cortex, our GeoFutures initiatives, and the geospatial companies which are locating here in and around what we believe will be a very dynamic area around the new NGA site. So we truly are at the center of developing a next generation of workforce in order to meet those challenges of the new companies and of our expanding companies. So there's more momentum and jobs for our robust economy. The city's unemployment rate, according to the Federal Reserve, is 2.9%. That's below the state and national average. And for African Americans in our city, it's the lowest point in more than 10 years. So the vast majority of new jobs created in Missouri through last month, November of 2019, compared to a year ago, were created right here in the metro area. The city's GDP, gross domestic product, was not only one of the strongest in the state, but among the fastest growing in the entire region. The city of St. Louis alone accounted for 10% of the GDP of the state. And when you think about that, we have about 5% of the population of the state. And so that is a very good signal to our growth and our GDP. And we have believe that this good momentum will carry into 2020 as well. So in 2020, we expect to see work begin on several major projects, NGA in North St. Louis. Some of you saw it was just the day before Thanksgiving, or 2 days before Thanksgiving. We broke ground on the new NGA project at the corner of Jefferson and Cass, so we're very encouraged by that. It's been a long time in coming, and it will still be a few more years before the NGA project opens, but that project in and of itself is a major job driver for our construction industry. But in addition to that, we're looking forward to a new convention center project, which we hope to break ground on this year, renovating our convention center. Also, of course, the new MLS stadium, which we're very hopeful will break ground this year. And those major projects, along with the projects that are happening all over our city and in our neighborhoods, will really solidify our region's innovation hub. They represent more, these 3 major projects that I mentioned represent more than $2 billion in construction and more than 5,000 jobs. Further proof that businesses are investing, people are excited to be here because they're confident about the direction that the city of St. Louis is moving in. So I want to talk just about a few other highlights with regard to what's been going on in the city this year. We graduated and hired about 150 new police officers through our police academy, and we currently have about 100 officers, I think 99 was the number I saw on Monday, that are in our police academies. Our trash task force, as some of you know, now has 200 cameras up to catch illegal dumpers in our alleys and around our neighborhoods, and they've issued more than 400 citations this year, which is double the amount of last year. Our St. Louis Youth Jobs had contact with over 1,000 young people for pre-employment services, and they hired over 800 young people in summer jobs this past summer. We funded affordable housing this past year at $6.6 million. They leveraged that into $120 million in private investment in affordable housing, and they awarded $5 million for safe, affordable housing. We've talked about this before, but we've demoed about 800 buildings in 2019, and that compares with around 350 last year, about 150 in 2017, and 28 in 2016. Now, these are buildings that have been in LRA's inventory for a long time and are in very, very bad, we're in very, very bad shape. We've attacked this as saying we're going to take down the buildings that are the worst first, but we've made some real progress over the last few years in those buildings. And as I'm fond of saying, you've heard this before, nothing good happens in a vacant building. And if you live on a block with vacant buildings, with the back off the building or the side has collapsed, you are very appreciative and encouraged by the fact that the city is taking that LRA building down because it improves your quality of life immensely. So I've signed more than 140 pieces of legislation this year, creating laws that make it illegal for kids under 18 to carry a gun, banning conversion therapy to protect our LGBT youth, established the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council to reform the justice system, enabled the sale of medical marijuana here in the city through changes in our zoning ordinance, and becoming the first Midwestern city to require new construction to be built solar ready, to be ready for those solar panels at a time when the owner of that new building may want to install them. I also want to mention, because this happened a few months ago, but we had the longest flood ever, 127 days above flood stage. Our employees, our street department employees, managed that flood. You saw the big sandbags along River Des Peres to try to keep that in its banks as the Mississippi backed up into that river. They closed 35 floodgates. That's no small feat. One of them had not been closed in over 20 years and difficult to close. So we managed the longest flood that the city has ever had without any serious difficulties or repercussions from that flood. Changing subjects just a little bit, over the last year, our efforts and our city's world-class attractions and cultural institutions have garnered a lot of national as well as local attention. Forbes recently called us one of the top tourist destinations in the country for 2020. We think that that's encouraging, not just for tourists from outside our city, but also from people here who maybe have a staycation or a weekend trip to drive in and be able to enjoy the new wheel that's at Union Station, the new aquarium, visit the Arch. Not everyone's been there yet. It's only been open for a year and a half. But also to visit some of our neighborhoods, Cherry Creek Street, the Central West End, the Loop, the great food scene that we have here in St. Louis. So we've consistently been ranked one of the top cities in the country for entrepreneurs, particularly women entrepreneurs who come here to start up, stand out, and stay. And we also believe that that's all related to the influx of young people that we have in our city. All of these attractions as well as the opportunities. But I would be remiss today if I didn't acknowledge that the other reason that St. Louis has been in the headlines in 2019, and that is the senseless gun violence that we've had in our city. Driven by drugs, driven by guns, driven by our state's lenient gun laws. This violence continues to cut lives short and tear families apart. As mayor, as someone who's personally felt that pain, of course I empathize and I sympathize with those families of every person that we've lost this year, particularly kids. That's one reason that in 2019 I created the Office of Youth, Children, and Families to better address and support the needs of our kids and of our families so that every child can achieve their full potential. But I also know that words alone or new offices alone aren't enough. People want action. I want action. We want this violence to be reduced. In 2020, in conjunction with local, state, and federal law enforcement partners, we will continue to focus on public safety as our highest priority. These are vital relationships. These relationships that we have with our federal partners are vital. Working with the Intelligence Division of the St. Louis Police Department, FBI Safe Streets Task Force, they made more than 350 arrests in 2019 and seized more than 90 guns. These are people that are wanted for violent felonies, including homicide and carjacking. As you know, the City of St. Louis Police Department continues to be about 130 police officers short. Unfortunately, this has been a pretty consistent number, despite the fact that we've trained and hired 150 police officers this year, and we have 100 officers who are in our academy right now. But we need to do more in order to close that gap on the number of police officers that we're short. And I'm working to increase pay for our police officers to address this chronic understaffing, but also we have 700 open positions in other departments in our city. So those two together are somewhere in the neighborhood of 830 or 40 shortages. And we have to be competitive in an environment where we're trying to hire and retain top-level talent in our police department and in all of our departments. I'm also working with the state legislature this year to try to lift the residency requirement for police officers and city employees. It's not the cure-all, but it is an impediment to hiring. As we have a small city population, we sometimes need to go outside of our boundaries. And frankly, St. Louis County doesn't have a residency requirement. Most other municipalities or areas in the region do not have a residency requirement. So we put ourselves at a disadvantage in hiring and retaining talent. Most of us don't like to be told where to live. We believe that our neighborhoods here in St. Louis are great neighborhoods, and we all live here, of course. And we think police officers and our employees will live here too. But it is a matter of not being told where you have to live. So we are hoping to be able to lift that residency requirement. I'm also, as you know, have been meeting with the governor's office and the mayors from the 4 largest cities in the state, so St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, and Columbia. And it's our goal to, hopefully the legislature will amend the laws to keep guns out of the hands of juveniles, to keep guns out of the hands of prior offenders and abusers, and to provide additional resources for mental health and witness protection. We also, as you know, have the Highway Patrol in St. Louis again this year. They are patrolling Highway 70, 55, 44, and 40 in an effort to stem the tide of guns and of drugs, and they are helpful in that our police department then is focusing more in the neighborhoods. That has been a helpful partnership that we are hopeful will continue throughout this year. But you know, we have to continue to fight crime from every angle, addressing the root causes of crime, poverty, blight, and disinvestment. And in 2020, our health department is leading the charge to implement the Cure Violence model in 3 targeted areas: Walnut Park, Wells Goodfellow / Hamilton Heights, and in Dutchtown, by treating gun violence as a public health crisis, which I certainly believe it is. Some cities have seen a reduction in violent crime. And so that implementation, which we expect to take place this spring, early summer, we're very hopeful about the results of that. Also, in the first few months of 2020, we'll be unveiling the city's Equitable Economic Development Strategy. It's a data-driven, comprehensive approach to help guide investment and effort both north of Del Mar and in areas of South St. Louis, which are experiencing difficulty with development. We expect that this will lead to more jobs and support existing businesses as we provide opportunities for all of us. Lastly, in the new year, we'll begin stabilizing LRA properties. I told you about the LRA properties that have been demolished. But for those that are in good enough shape that they can be stabilized, we'll begin implementing the new Prop NS, Prop Neighborhood Stabilization. In fact, the new Prop NS manager starts on Monday. So we're looking forward to that, to be able to invest in a new roof or a new tuck pointing or new gutters to make these buildings watertight, so that then they are much more attractive to someone who wants to buy a building but doesn't want to take on the entire expense and difficulty of roofs, gutters, and tuck pointing. So that'll be implemented as well. It's worth noting, I think, that for the 4th consecutive year, LRA, Land Reutilization Authority, has sold more properties than it's taken in the tax sales. Numbers for this past year were we sold 552 properties, we took in 272. That's in the right direction. We know we still have too many vacant buildings and still too many vacant lots, but it is a trend in the right direction over these last 4 years. So our inventory is going down a little bit. We need rehab to help spur that as well. So it's my great honor, really, to serve as the mayor of the city of St. Louis, and I appreciate all of you being here today to talk about some of the highlights of this past year. And I said this on Tuesday, Christmas Eve, at the annual memorial for homicide victims, but I think it's worth repeating as I wrap up here today. Coming together as a city is just the beginning. Staying together is progress, and working together will be our success. So it's on all of us to make that happen, to continue the momentum to push St. Louis forward.